June 10, 2002, 12:45 in the afternoon, Springfield, Missouri, a small room in the United States Medical Center for Federal Prisoners. Behind two locked steel doors, in a bed surrounded by tubes feeding him nutrients and painkillers, the most photographed mob boss in American history took his last breath. No pinstripe suit, no silk tie, no crowd of loyalists watching, just machines and silence. John Gotti was 61 years old. He had been locked away for almost 10 years. And in the end, he died exactly the way the federal government designed it. Alone, forgotten, mute. He hadn't been able to speak for months. 8 tumors in his neck. A tracheotomy in February of that year had cut open his throat just to give him air. The man who had once held press conferences on the sidewalk outside his own courthouse. The man who had walked out of 3 separate federal prosecutions while his lawyers drank champagne and the tabloids screamed his name. That man died without saying another word to anyone he loved. This is the story of what happened to John Gotti when the system finally got him. Not just the arrest, not just the conviction, but the deliberate, methodical dismantling of a man who had built his entire identity around being untouchable. This is the story of the cell, the cancer, and the 10 years of silence that broke the Teflon Don without ever making him talk. But here is what most people miss about John Gotti. The fall wasn't sudden. It took 30 years of decisions, each one building on the last, each one tightening a trap he helped build himself. To understand what prison did to him, you have to understand what made him in the first place. October 27th, 1940, the Bronx, New York City. A baby boy named John Joseph Gotti was born the 5th of 13 children to a day laborer father who spent whatever he earned at the card tables. The family had nothing, no stability, no money, no plan. When John was 12, the Gottis moved to East New York in Brooklyn, one of the roughest neighborhoods in one of the toughest cities on earth. His father worked when he felt like it. His mother held the family together, and young John, who was big for his age, quick with his fists, and hungry in a way that had nothing to do with food, found his people on the street. By the time he was 12, he was running errands for local mob-connected crews. By 16, he dropped out of Franklin K. Lane High School entirely. School was slow, the streets were fast, and the streets had men in them who wore good shoes and drove good cars and commanded respect from everyone around them. That was what Gotti wanted. Not the money, not exactly. The respect, the feeling of being somebody when you came from nothing. He fell in with the Gambino crime family crew operating out of the Virgin Hunt and Fish Club at 98-04 101st Avenue in Ozone Park, Queens. The club was run by a capo named Carmine Fatico, who had named it after his old stomping ground on Bergen Street in Brooklyn, with a deliberate spelling change to throw people off. Behind the red reinforced doors, past the two-way mirrors and the metal grates on the windows, was a world Gotti understood immediately. There was a card table, a small bar, a kitchen where the crew cooked Italian food on Wednesdays, and in the back, a magnificent bathroom and a barber chair where Gotti would eventually sit for hours, holding court, dispensing orders, becoming a boss. You have to understand what Gotti was doing in those years. He wasn't just earning, he was studying. He watched how the senior men moved, how they spoke, how they handled disputes. He noted who got respect and why. He was patient in a way that contradicts everything people later thought about him. The flashy John Gotti came later. The young John Gotti was a sponge. But here is the first sign of what would eventually destroy him. Even then, Gotti was drawn to the public stage. He liked being seen, liked being known. In a world that demanded invisibility, he was already leaning toward the spotlight. Through the 1970s, Gotti rose steadily through the Gambino ranks under underboss Aniello Della Croce, a quiet, fearsome man who mentored him. Then, on March 18, 1980, something happened that changed John Gotti permanently. His middle son, Frank, who was 12 years old, was struck and killed by a car driven by a neighbor named John Favara. It was an accident. Favara, horrified, tried to reach out to the Gotti family. He moved away. It didn't matter. On July 28, 1980, Favara disappeared. His remains were eventually found in a vacant lot just down the road from the Bergin Club. The case was never officially solved. Nobody who knew Gotti before and after March of 1980 will tell you he was the same man. He became harder, faster to anger. The grief didn't soften him, it calcified him. By 1985, a war was building inside the Gambino family. The boss, Paul Castellano, was pulling the family away from street operations and into corporate crime. He was insulating himself in a mansion in Staten Island, refusing to socialize with his own men, demanding an ever larger cut of their earnings while contributing little to the day-to-day work. The crews resented him. Gotti despised him. And there was something more dangerous. Castellano had learned that Gotti's crew had been dealing heroin in violation of the family's rules. A man like Castellano, threatened and offended, might sanction a hit on Gotti first. So Gotti moved first. Here is how the Castellano assassination worked, step by step. Step 1. The planning. Gotti quietly built a coalition of Gambino capos, who shared his frustration with Castellano's leadership. He recruited killers. He selected a location. Step 2. The location. Sparks Steakhouse, 210 East 46th Street in Midtown Manhattan, a place where Castellano had agreed to a meeting on the evening of December 16, 1985. Step 3. The execution. At 5:25 in the evening, as Castellano's limousine pulled up outside the restaurant, 4 shooters in white trench coats and Russian-style fur hats moved in from different directions. Castellano and his driver, underboss Thomas Bilotti, were shot and killed before they reached the front door. The entire hit took seconds. Step 4. Gotti watched from a car parked nearby, with Sammy Gravano sitting beside him. There was no messy cleanup, no trace left. On January 15, 1986, at a meeting of 20 Gambino capos, John Gotti was formally acclaimed the new boss of the most powerful crime family in the United States. He was 45 years old, and now everything changed. Because Gotti did something no modern mob boss had done. He walked straight into the spotlight. The tabloids fell in love with him. He held court on the sidewalks of Little Italy. He showed up at his trials in impeccable suits. He threw massive 4th of July celebrations in Ozone Park for the whole neighborhood. People cheered him in the street like he was a movie star. He gave interviews, in his way. He was photographed everywhere, and he kept beating the law. In 1986, acquitted. In 1987, acquitted again. In 1990, another acquittal. The press started calling him the Teflon Don. Nothing stuck. But here is the thing the press didn't fully report at the time. Some of that Teflon was purchased. In the 1987 racketeering trial, a juror named George Pape had been reached. Gotti's associates, through an intermediary named Bosco Radonjic, paid $60,000 to bribe Pape into voting for acquittal and working on the other jurors. It worked. Gotti walked out free. Pape was later convicted for accepting the bribe. That is who the Teflon Don actually was. Not an untouchable man, a man who was buying his untouchability, one corrupted jury at a time. But you can't buy your way out forever, and the FBI was learning. By the late 1980s, Special Agent Bruce Mao was running the FBI's dedicated Gotti investigation. His team had tried everything. Taps on the phones at the Bergin Hunt and Fish Club produced little. Gotti never said anything incriminating on the phone. When he had to discuss business, he took walk and talks through the streets of Ozone Park or Little Italy, always moving, always watching for surveillance. He was disciplined, careful. The public image was reckless. The private man was not. But Gotti had a blind spot. He had moved his operations to the Ravenite Social Club at 247 Mulberry Street in Little Italy, the former headquarters of his mentor Delacroix. And he had made a rule. Every made man in the family had to show up at the Ravenite at least once a week, in person, to show respect every week. That meant the FBI could photograph and identify virtually every significant member of the Gambino family. Gravano, who understood surveillance better than Gotti, thought this was dangerously stupid. Gotti wouldn't hear it. Then, over Thanksgiving weekend of 1989, while an elderly woman named Nettie Cirelli was on vacation in Florida, an FBI black bag team entered her apartment at 247 Mulberry Street. Nettie was the widow of a Gambino soldier. Her apartment was directly above the Ravenite. And Gotti, when he had truly sensitive conversations, would leave the main club floor, slip through a back hallway, and go upstairs to talk in what he believed was total privacy. The team planted a listening device. Then they waited. What came back was extraordinary. On the apartment tapes, Gotti was captured discussing murders, discussing who needed to die and why. In one recording, he explained the impending death of a Gambino captain named Luis Di Bono with calm contempt. "You know why he is dying?" Gotti said. "He is gonna die because he refused to come in when I called. He didn't do nothing else wrong." That sentence would be played in a federal courtroom in front of a jury. It would help put Gotti away for the rest of his life. But the most damaging thing the tapes produced had nothing to do with murder orders. It was gossip. Specifically, Gotti had been using the apartment meetings to complain about his underboss. Salvatore Gravano, 46 at the time, built solid, a man who had personally committed 19 murders and who had spent years as Gotti's most trusted enforcer. Gotti had begun to worry that Gravano's growing network of construction businesses was giving him too much independent power. He expressed this concern to consigliere Frank Locascio on tape multiple times. Gravano heard those tapes after he was arrested. Think about what that means. 19 murders, 20 years of loyalty, and now Gravano was listening to his boss question his trustworthiness behind his back. In 1991, Salvatore "Sammy the Bull" Gravano agreed to cooperate with the federal government. He became the highest-ranking American Mafia member ever to flip. He admitted to 19 murders. He agreed to testify against John Gotti. It was over. December 11th, 1990. The FBI had already made the arrests, but the trial was coming. On April 2nd, 1992, after 14 hours of deliberation, the jury delivered their verdict. Guilty on all 13 counts, 5 murders, racketeering, obstruction, bribery, tax evasion, illegal gambling, everything. Judge Leo Glasser asked Gotti if he wished to speak before sentencing. Gotti said nothing. On June 23, 1992, Glasser sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole and fined him $250,000. Less than 24 hours later, Gotti was transferred to the United States Penitentiary in Marion, Illinois, 110 miles southeast of St. Louis, the nation's toughest federal facility at the time. He walked in wearing military surplice, khaki trousers, and a khaki shirt. The impeccable suits were gone. Everything was gone. Here is what Marion was. Not a place where you served time. A place where time was used to serve you up. Gotti was placed in the special housing unit, 23 hours a day in a 6 by 8 foot cell. A mattress on the floor, no bed frame, no chair. A radio, 1 hour of outside recreation per day, 5 visits per month, 3 phone calls per month, and some months, possibly just 1 call every 90 days. For a man who had built his entire identity around being present, visible, dominant, talked about, cheered for, this was something beyond punishment. It was erasure. The contrast staggers you. 2 years earlier, this man had walked out of a federal courthouse to a crowd cheering his name, photographers shouting for him to turn and smile. reporters calling him the Dapper Don. Now he slept on a mattress on a concrete floor in a cell the size of a bathroom, allowed to see the sky for 60 minutes a day. Remember this: Gotti served more consecutive time in solitary confinement than any federal prisoner in recent American history, over 10 years. Supporters eventually contacted Amnesty International. The organization attempted to interview Gotti about his conditions. He refused to speak with them. Even in solitary, he wouldn't ask for help. That was who he was. But his body had other plans. July 18th, 1996. In the prison recreation room, during his single daily hour outside the cell, an inmate named Walter Johnson punched Gotti. The details of the altercation are disputed, but what isn't disputed is Gotti's response. From inside a federal solitary unit, with no money flowing and no organization behind him, Gotti reached out to members of the Aryan Brotherhood operating within Marion. He reportedly offered them somewhere between $40,000 and $400,000 to have Johnson killed. The contract was never completed. Johnson was transferred to another facility before it could be carried out. Think about that for a moment. 10 years into his sentence, no power, no crew, no financial resources he could freely access. And John Gotti was still trying to order killings from inside a concrete box. The man didn't break, but something else was breaking inside him, quietly, without anyone knowing. 1998. For months, Gotti had been complaining to prison medical staff about a sore throat. His lawyer, Bruce Cutler, would later say that staff ignored those complaints for approximately 3 months before ordering any tests. During those same years, Gotti had suffered a serious gum infection that went untreated for so long it required surgery and 54 stitches to resolve. In September of 1998, at the United States Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Springfield, Missouri, where he had been sent for evaluation, the diagnosis came back. A malignant tumor near his lymph nodes and tonsils. Throat cancer. Surgery removed the tumor. Doctors gave him approximately 6 months to live. He was 57 years old. He outlived the prediction by nearly 4 years. That stubbornness, that refusal to yield on any front, was real. Louis Kassman, a longtime confidant who visited him regularly, recalled that Gotti defied every medical expectation. His family considered suing the federal prison system for the delayed diagnosis, the kind of negligent suit that could have run into the millions. Cutler stated publicly that Gotti was eyeing exactly that claim. But Gotti himself, according to Cutler, didn't believe in lawsuits. He wouldn't file. In 2000, the cancer returned. It spread aggressively to his head, neck, and ears. By September of that year, he was transferred permanently to the Medical Center for Federal Prisoners in Springfield. By April of 2001, he was in a wheelchair. His lawyers fought in court to have him moved closer to his family in New York. The courts refused. He was sent back. By August of 2001, he'd been hospitalized 3 times in a matter of months. In February of 2002, the end accelerated. 8 tumors in Gotti's neck had grown so large that they were closing off his airway. Surgeons performed an emergency tracheotomy, a tube inserted through his throat directly into his windpipe. The procedure saved his life temporarily. It also took away the last thing he had left, his voice. Before the surgery, he spoke to Louis Kassman one final time. "Keep smiling," Gotti told him. "Stay strong." Then he went silent, permanently. In those final weeks, John Gotti lay in a coma, like state behind 2 locked steel doors. He was connected to tubes that fed him nutrition and powerful painkillers. His son Peter sat beside him. A video camera recorded the one-sided conversations. On June 10, 2002, at 12:45 in the afternoon, New York time, John Joseph Gotti was pronounced dead. The cause was complications from head, neck, and throat cancer. He was 61 years old. The Federal Bureau of Prisons issued a press release before notifying the family. his relatives found out from reporters. Bruce Cutler, when asked about the autopsy the Bureau wanted to perform, responded, "We know what killed him, but we also know you'll find 10 lions' hearts in there." The government had one more indignity ready for the Gotti family, and the family knew it. They objected to the autopsy. They claimed his body and flew it back to New York. The streets of Ozone Park and Howard Beach filled with mourners almost immediately. People gathered outside the Virgin Hunt and Fish Club, which had been slowly dying since his conviction. Candles, flowers, stories. The neighborhood had loved him, and in that neighborhood, on that day, they still did. Thousands lined the route of his funeral procession to St. John's Cemetery in Queens. He was buried beside his son, Frank, the boy who had been killed on March 18, 1980. 22 years after losing his son, John Gotti was in the ground beside him. The Gambino crime family, the most powerful organized crime organization in the country for decades, splintered within months. John Gotti Jr. had already pleaded guilty to bribery, extortion, gambling, and fraud, and was serving nearly 6 years. Peter Gotti, who became acting boss in the days after his brother's death, was indicted on racketeering charges within weeks and eventually sentenced to life. By the turn of the century, roughly half of all Gambino-made men were behind bars. Anthony Casso, the former underboss of the Lucchese family, said it plainly. What John Gotti did was the beginning of the end of Cosa Nostra. Former New York FBI chief Louis Schiliro agreed in his own way. It's the end of an era. There's not going to be another John Gotti. Both men were right, but for entirely different reasons than most people think. Here is the real story of John Gotti, stripped of the mythology. He didn't beat the FBI 3 times because he was untouchable. He beat them because he bought juries. He wasn't a strategic genius. He was a man who confused visibility with power and paid for that confusion with a decade in a box. The Teflon Don nickname was always ironic. Teflon is a coating. It wears off. What killed John Gotti wasn't the FBI, and it wasn't the cancer, not entirely. What killed him was the same thing that made him. He needed to be seen. He needed to be the boss in the most public way possible. He brought reporters to his doorstep. He turned himself into a brand, and that brand made him the priority. It made every FBI director, every federal prosecutor, every United States attorney point at him and say, "That one, we need that one." He gave them exactly what they needed to destroy him. Sammy Gravano didn't betray John Gotti because of 19 murders. He betrayed him because of wounded pride. Because Gotti talked behind his back on a tape he didn't know existed, in an apartment he didn't know was bugged. Above a club he had insisted every member of his family walk into every week like clockwork, so the FBI could photograph all of them. Every trap that caught John Gotti was one he helped set. The last 10 years of his life stripped everything away. The suits, the crowds, the courtroom theater, the voice, until there was just a man on a mattress in a 6 by 8 foot room, 1,165 miles from home, dying of a disease that prison medicine had taken 3 months too long to find. He wouldn't cooperate. He wouldn't ask for mercy. He wouldn't become a witness. To the very end, he played the role he'd chosen at 12 years old in the streets of East New York. The price of that role was everything he had. That's not a mob story. That's a Greek tragedy in a khaki prison uniform. If this story got under your skin, hit subscribe. We put out a new mob documentary every single week. And drop a comment below. Was John Gotti a visionary who changed the Mafia forever? Or did his ego guarantee his own destruction from day one? Tell us what you think.